Yeah, I think we're recording now. So I haven't written a script for this. I'm going to go off the cuff because otherwise I'm going to keep reading the script and I'm going to lose my train of thought. Like it would just be automatic. So this is a project that I've decided to undertake, um, like for the next couple of months, I expect. And that is what the philosophical impacts are of WikiLeaks documents. So basically, like what can we gather from the context with which documents were leaked, the documents themselves, and the impact of those leaks, how that, broadly speaking, affects other people, what it says about the nature of information, among other questions. So this is basically like a trailer video, just going through and explaining in more detail what I hope to achieve with this. So yeah, let's just get into it. So as I said, this series is going to be focused specifically on analysing these leaked documents from a philosophical place. And that could be in a bunch of different areas, be that ethical, something to do with the philosophy of politics, just war as an example, and also, more interestingly, and this is probably going to be my favourite part to talk about, the epistemic impacts of WikiLeaks documents. So by that I mean, what can WikiLeaks documents tell us with respect to the nature of knowing something? What ought we to know? When do we, or when can we claim to know something, etc. And obviously, I'm going to be as factual as possible. At the very least, while I am probably left-leaning as far as this goes, although I find that definition or that label kind of arbitrary. I'm not immune to being biased towards it. A lot of the things that have been leaked, I believe, were right to have been leaked. That said, the context with which they were leaked, and the actual information that's disclosed in these documents, I'll keep completely factual. I will make sure that there is no spin, no matter how subtle. And it's only when we get into a philosophical territory will I start talking about both what I think, both what other schools of philosophy think as well. That was a bit of a weird sentence. Apologies for that. Again, off the cuff. But yeah, that's basically an overview of what these series of videos are going to be. So one thing that I've noticed for a good while now on YouTube is the fact that whenever someone makes a video essay, and that's how I'm going to describe these video essays, a lot of people tend to skim over the finer details. Like, I think a lot of people get too bogged down in whether or not something can be effectively monetized, and so they focus more on what the appeal of what they're talking about is, as opposed to the content that they're explaining to their audience. And I think a lot of that is down to not being able to navigate the sheer scope of things that video essayists commonly talk about. Be that a particular, video game, a piece of lost media, or more broadly speaking, like a genre of something. I know there's a lot of good video essayists out there. I think Jacob Geller's probably my favourite of the bunch. And the reason why that's the case is because I think his video essays are more successful than others because he has the credentials necessary to make good video essays. And by good video essays, I mean essays that are incredibly factual, dense with information, and contains interpretations both previously discussed and new. I think it's important to have something new to contribute when you're making a video essay, because the point of an essay is to get a particular point across, right? In a way that someone potentially hasn't done before. Not to say that someone hasn't done, for instance, a WikiLeaks philosophical perspective video before, I'm sure that there is absolutely at least more than one person that's done that, given how well known in the public sphere WikiLeaks is, and how long philosophy has been around. So yeah, I'm not claiming that it necessarily has to be novel, but I do think that a lot of people tend to just recite information from the things that they're writing video essays about, as opposed to, you know, making something interesting and with depth, I guess. So a little background for myself. I am a philosophy graduate, so I have the background in not just researching philosophy of politics, ethics, epistemology, etc., but also how to write essays that focus on those topics in a variety of different backgrounds. So I've written essays on radical philosophy, ethics of businesses, of governments, moral responsibility, who should be held accountable in particular situations, ideas surrounding utilitarianism. That's a very kind of gateway philosophical subject, I think, like what it means to consider one choice better than another. And I could go on, but basically I wanted to get out of the gate right away, in case I end up complaining about this at some later point, that I have got experience in making these relatively non-technical. Obviously, we'll get into technical philosophical concepts, but I'm hoping at least I'll be able to explain them in a way that's useful for people that aren't, you know, in that kind of sphere. People who are just interested in WikiLeaks and are potentially more like autodidactic in philosophy. And I think it's important that this is publicly accessible as well, hence the kind of long form, one take approach that I'm going to aim to do for this. Because I think not only is the natural teaching of a concept very useful, and there's no kind of like weirdness as far as structuring everything goes. It's a lot more relaxed, laid back, similar to my streams, which are a little bit more on the introspective side, but are still very much like I don't have necessarily a set plan to go in besides the games. In this case, I do have a set plan going in, but it's rather to do with the philosophical concepts I'm going to apply to the documents that I'm going to be talking about, and I'll talk more about that now. So, yeah, as I said, I've got some videos planned, and the first one, in this order, might change for the record, depending on if I see something that's going to fit better, like after one video as opposed to another, and so on. But this is a fairly well-known video, Collateral Murder. I think it definitely is the most famous kind of leaked piece of media that WikiLeaks has provided to the general public. And I'll save like the contextual information for it for the video. But for now, just know that this is a great case for talking about when we should hold people accountable and how transparent governments and organizations should be with their people, or the people that they're serving, in order to prevent abuses of power. And more specifically, as I put there, what is the balance of security and right to know? So when is it that we need to sacrifice security of documents in order to let the public know what's going on, you know, what they're putting money towards, what their governments are involved in, and how they, or like what they can do to choose like something else, essentially. The ethics of whistleblowing, I wrote a paper on this that I will link. In fact, I'll link any relevant essays I've written along with my sources for the videos in the description of each respective video. But yeah, so is there an ethical obligation to to whistleblowing? I mean, is it always? I mean, you see people in these like high-ranking officials, whenever a document of their organization gets leaked, it's very much like, oh, this whistleblower is a coward. They went against their country, especially in military documents being leaked. And then on the flip side, you have people being like, well, no, actually, there's this huge circle of abuse going on and no one knew about it. So this person's really a hero for getting it out there. So I discuss whether or not disclosure of information is always in the public's interest and what obligations someone must serve for their company or organization or whatever, which will be very interesting, in my opinion. So a little more on that freedom of information and democracy. That's kind of a tie-in video. So when I talk about things like whistleblowing or government transparency, it really, in a broader sense, is talking about when people have the right to information, when should people know about something. And in that video, I will discuss whether it's necessary to hold democracies accountable, or maybe even organizations or nations that aren't democracies or aren't democratic, how it might empower people to be able to, do their own research, giving them the opportunity to be outraged, and, doing something about it en masse. And, whether or not that's a good thing, a bad thing, somewhere in the middle, and if it's even necessary for a democracy to function. Not just something that would be nice to have, but maybe transparency and the ability to access information is important in order to sustain a democracy and make sure that that ideology kind of, perseveres. This one's more specific, so this is power dynamics and information control. So when is it too much for a nation to keep information from not just their people, but other nations too? Whether or not information should be claimed as a source of power, and that you kind of want to, if you're in a high position, keep what information you have to yourself. So then you can, essentially just do what you want to do without risk of scrutiny, and potentially even, in a very loose term, usurpation. And we'll talk about views from particular philosophers there, so Gramsci and Foucault, and probably a few others as well. Cyber ethics and digital privacy, this one's very much in, and it has been in since, I want to say since people started wising up to the fact that social media has got this huge monopoly on information. So, what are the ethical implications of sacrificing privacy for security? How responsible are corporations and, by extension, organizations and governments in protecting user data or just the information that they have on people? And what are the ethics behind surveillance, if there is any ethics behind surveillance? So is it always a good thing that there's all of these cameras everywhere and, you can't take a piss in a bush without there being a video caught of it? And how we adjust to that. I mean, I'm recording this video from the UK, which is the most surveyed country in the world, I believe, last I checked. And, that comes with its own implications because crime still happens here. There are blind spots. There are things that are overlooked. Not to mention how a big thing in a lot of developed countries now is the fact that their police force abuses their power. And is the fact that these police can seemingly do whatever they want as soon as they have a photograph of an individual in a way that it's convenient to them. Is that ethical? Going back to the collateral murder video, for example, there's a scene in that, and I won't show the video, but I will encourage you to see it for yourself. But there is a scene in that, because it is quite dramatic, hence why I use the word scene, of these fighter pilots justifying helicopter pilots justifying their blatant murder of innocent people, including two journalists, one of them holding an RPG, and they weren't. They were holding their camera. So would the fact that they misinterpreted that mean that scrutiny would be more lenient on them? Was it some kind of, plausible deniability? Yeah, moving on. Truth and information overload. I feel like a lot of people will have this one resonate. Information is directly accessible to us at any time, any place, from essentially any medium. There is so much information out there now that a lot is kind of drowned out. You're seeing a lot more with AI recently, obviously. I won't talk about that too much because I'm sure everyone's sick to death of it. But just the fact that there is so much fake news out there and that I feel is a genuine epistemic term, fake news. But it's a lot harder to discern truth. You get examples like deep fakes or political spin on something. You have all of these independent journalists now who have their own political agendas. You have the current political ideologies in power trying to maintain that power by putting spin on anything the opposing ideologies do. And is there such a thing as post-truth? Are we beyond direct truth now, in a time where everything is centralized, interconnected, and infinitely complex? So that'll be an interesting video. The role of journalism in society. I did speak about that briefly, but just, how free should the press be? Are they allowed to put an ideological bias on what they write? Is it right for us to consume content which isn't neutral to the facts? And are organizations like WikiLeaks important to stand in as like a watchdog role to keep powers in check, the powers that be, to stop them from doing, all these horrendous things? We have moral responsibility. I won't talk about this one much because hopefully you sort of saw this as the motif through the rest of these. Surveillance, the same way. What's the value of privacy? How do we balance privacy and security? I spoke about that a couple minutes ago. And historical philosophers on WikiLeaks. This one is going to be a lot more, I don't know if you could tell, philosophical in nature compared to the other ones, because there won't be a particular WikiLeaks document in question. Instead, I'll be talking about 3 different philosophers from 3 different centuries, and kind of asking like, well, what would they think about it based on what we know their views to be, or what we know their arguments or ideas or concepts to be. So we've got Niccolo Machiavelli, we've got Thomas Hobbes, and we've got Immanuel Kant. And all of them, I think, have very interesting things that they would say if they're around for WikiLeaks to be a thing. But obviously, all of them are long dead. So yeah, those are all the videos. Again, they're not necessarily going to be in that order. Some might be longer than others. Some might be shorter than the rest. And again, there might be this running theme that means that the order of the videos might gel better a different way. As I said before, I'll provide a reading list. I encourage discussion and questions in the comments. Constructive, please. I don't want to have to go through and delete tons of negative comments being like, oh, this is anti-democrat. Yeah, this is, again, I'm trying to talk about the facts in as neutral a way as possible, and then bringing philosophy into these sorts of contexts and seeing what we can do with it. This is purely an experimental thing. I'm not sure how far it can go, but it's worth a shot. People did climb Everest after all because it was there. So while this is obviously daunting given the amount of documents that have been released, I'm certainly up to the task because I want to see, where it leads. And as far as the timing of this goes, I kind of want to keep a routine to it because it keeps me in check. So best case scenario, these will be released one at a time, weekly. That might change to bi-weekly, as in every other week. But I'll see what my workload's like upon the release of the first video, and we'll go from there. And obviously, you guys will be updated on that as and when, if it changes. But for now, just assume that it will be a weekly thing. So yeah, that is everything. That's everything I wanted to cover. That is a rundown of what to expect from videos on this channel in the next couple of weeks. I hope you enjoy it. Please do give me feedback when they are released. I love to talk about it. I mean, philosophy's my area, I always find it interesting to talk about it in any kind of situation. But I think this WikiLeaks exercise will be quite interesting. We might come across some ideas that have been discussed in the literature before, or maybe, if I'm lucky, if I'm very, very lucky, something new. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Stream coming up later tonight, and yeah, thank you guys.